Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back. Way back. We're going to a time and place that you probably think you know, that you've likely got it all wrong. Forget the horned helmets which they never wore. By the way, in the grunting, filthy brutes from a bad movie. Tonight, you are setting foot in the real Viking Age. And just a friendly heads up, based on the historical reality, your modern sensibilities might not get you through the first day. It's a world where beauty is brutal and survival is a full-time job. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And for our little community ritual, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air that greets you is thick and wet. A cocktail of salt spray, damp earth, and pine smoke. Your foot sinks slightly as you step onto the shore. The ground a messy churn of mud and trampled grass. This isn't a grand city entrance, it's a working harbor. Somewhere in Scandinavia around the 9th century. You can hear the rhythmic thump of a blacksmith's hammer in the distance, the cry of gulls overhead, and the low murmur of voices speaking a language you can't understand, Old Norse, a tongue that feels like it rumbles up from the chest. Looming over the shoreline are longhouses, their dark timber frames and turf roofs looking like slumbering beasts hunched against the gray sky. You pull the collar of your tunic closer, expecting to be met with the stench and squalor you've always associated with this era. You brace yourself for the sight of wild-haired, mud-caked warriors, but as the first few locals pass you by, something feels off. A man with a thick, reddish beard walks past, and you notice his beard is intricately braided. It's not just a chaotic mess of facial hair, it's styled. A woman follows, her long, blonde hair pulled back neatly in a knot, held in place by what looks like a pin carved from bone. They're not wearing rags either. Their woolen clothes are dyed in surprisingly rich, earthy colors, deep reds, mossy greens, and a surprising flash of blue. This is your first clue that the stereotype is a lie. These are not people who have just crawled out of a cave. You look around the settlement, which historians might call burqa or hidibai, and you see a society. It's a bit rough around the edges. Sure, there are no paved streets, and a stray pig just trotted past you with an indignant snort. But there's an order to the chaos. This is a place of commerce, of craft, of family. These Vikings were not just raiders, they were farmers, traders, explorers, and artisans. The amber beads on that woman's necklace might have come from the Baltic coast. The silk threads woven into that man's tunic cuff could have traveled all the way from Constantinople. And then there's the smell, or rather, the lack of one. It's not the overpowering stench of human waste you might find in medieval London or Paris. The air is surprisingly brisk. Beneath the smoke and salt, there's a faint, sharp, almost chemical scent you can't quite place. It's clean, in a harsh sort of way. It's the smell of lye. You don't know it yet, but you're smelling one of their biggest beauty secrets. A substance strong enough to bleach hair and kill lice. You watch as a group of men haul a boat further onto the shore. They're muscular, yes, and their faces are weathered by sun and sea, but they're not filthy. In fact, for people who do hard, manual labor all day, they look remarkably groomed. One of them pauses to wipe sweat from his brow, and you see it tucked into his belt as a small, decorated comb. They comb. In this rugged, supposedly barbaric world, a man carries a comb with him like a modern person carries a phone. It's a disorienting realization. You came here expecting savagery and found vanity. You expected filth and found a strange, almost obsessive, cleanliness. The question of how urban these settlements truly were is something historians still debate. Were they sophisticated trading hubs, the precursors to modern cities, or were they just large, well-organized villages centered around a marketplace The evidence suggests a complex reality somewhere in between. What's clear, though, as you stand in the mud of this ancient harbor, is that the people who lived here cared deeply about their appearance, and as you'll soon discover, the lengths they would go to for the sake of looking good were far more brutal than any battle. The man with the braided beard catches your eye for a moment. He nods, a simple, neutral gesture. Before turning away, you can't help but notice how his hair, though dark at the roots, seems to lighten to a near white at the tips, as if kissed by a chemical sun. You follow the flow of people moving away from the docks, your feet finding a slightly more solid path that winds between the longhouses. The air still carries that sharp, light soap scent, that now it's mingled with the smell of wet woolen wood smoke curling from the smoke holes in the turf roofs. You keep expecting the illusion to break, to turn a corner and find the filth and squalor of your history books. But it doesn't happen. Instead, you see a woman shaking out a woven blanket, beating the dust from it with a stick. You see a man carefully scraping mud from his leather boots with a piece of sharpened bone. It's a deliberate, methodical cleanliness. This focus on hygiene, you realize, isn't an accident, it's a cultural pillar. You're witnessing a society that has a deep-seated appreciation for order and grooming, and this finds its peak in a weekly ritual. You might not know the day of the week, but if you could ask, you'd be told it's Laugard Gur. The name itself tells you everything you need to know. August means bath or pool. Then Dag means day. It's literally bath day. To the Vikings, Saturday wasn't just the end of the week. It was the day set aside for a full body wash. This wasn't a casual suggestion, it was an ingrained social custom. So fundamental that the name for Saturday in modern Icelandic, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish still traces its roots back to this very practice. You can almost picture the grumbling from across the North Sea in Anglo-Saxon England. English chroniclers of the time were both perplexed and annoyed by this Scandinavian habit. One monk, John of Wallingford, writing a couple of centuries later, but reflecting a long-held sentiment, complained bitterly that the Viking men were far too popular with the local English ladies. Why? Because, as he put it, they combed their hair daily, bathed every Saturday, and changed their clothes frequently. In a world where a full bath might be a once-a-year event for many, these well-groomed invaders seemed impossibly exotic and sophisticated. They were, to the chagrin of the local competition, stealing hearts through the shocking audacity of good hygiene. You wander towards the edge of the settlement, near a river, and you see this ritual in action. There's a small, windowless wooden hut or bathish. Billows of steam pour from the door every time someone enters or exits. Inside, men are sitting on wooden benches in the dark, sweltering heat. They've thrown water onto a pile of superheated stones in the center of the room, creating a makeshift sauna. The air is so thick with steam you can barely breathe. They beat their skin with bundles of birch twigs to get the blood flowing and scrub away the grime of the week. Then comes the shocking part. They emerge from this intense heat, bodies glowing red, and plunge directly into the frigid river water. The thermal shock is immense, a violent jolt to the system that would leave you gasping. But for them, it's invigorating, a closing of the pores, a final, bracing rinse. For those without a dedicated bathish, the process is simpler but no less essential: heating water in a cauldron over an open fire and washing in a wooden tub, or simply taking a cold scrub in the nearest stream, no matter the weather. Of course, the exact nature and frequency of these baths are still a point of discussion among archaeologists and historians. Did every single person, from the mightiest jarl to the lowliest thrall, a slave or serf, get a hot bath every Saturday? Probably not. It was likely a status symbol to some degree. The wealthy could afford purpose-built bathhouses and servants to haul the water and heat the stones. A poor farmer might have had to make do with a cold bucket and a rough cloth. The historical accounts, like that of Arab diplomat Muad'Dib ibn Fadlan, describe Vikings washing their faces and hands daily in a shared basin. a practice he found rather disgusting for its communal nature, but it still points to a routine of daily ablutions. So while the Saturday bath was the ideal, the reality of daily life probably meant varying degrees of cleanliness. As you watch a man emerge from the river, his long hair dripping, you see him reach for that same essential tool you saw earlier at the docks. It's not a towel, those were a luxury. It's a comb. He meticulously begins to work it through his wet hair, detangling the knots with a practiced patience. The comb is not an afterthought, it's a crucial part of the process. It seems that in the Viking world, being clean was only the first step. The second, and perhaps even more important step, was being tidy, and that obsession was embodied in this one simple object. You turn your attention back toward the main settlement, the image of the man combing his hair by the river still fresh in your mind. That small, personal item seems to hold a significance far beyond its simple function. As you walk past the longhouses, you start noticing it everywhere. A woman sitting in a doorway, mending a tunic, has a long, slender comb carved from antler lying in her lap. A craftsman, pausing from his work on a leather satchel, has one tucked into his belt, its teeth worn smooth with use. It's as ubiquitous as a house key. You peer into the open doorway of a dwelling, where the smoky dimness is cut by a shaft of light from the roof opening. Your eyes adjust, and you can make out the interior a central fire pit, earthen floors covered with straw, and wooden benches along the walls that serve as both seating and beds. That hanging from a peg on the wall, given a place of honor, are several combs of different sizes. They aren't just tools, they're decorations, artifacts of daily life displayed with pride. These aren't cheap, disposable plastic things. Each one is a small work of art, a testament to the owner's status and the craftsman's skill. You see combs carved from the antlers of reindeer, the bones of cattle, and, for the very wealthy, even ivory from walrus tusks. They are often composite combs, made from several flat pieces of bone or antler riveted together, with a stronger, thicker piece forming the spine. The surfaces are polished smooth and frequently decorated with intricate patterns, geometric shapes, swirling knotwork, or stylized animals chasing each other in an endless loop. This is the famous Viking art style you've seen in museums, but here it is, on an everyday object, something a person would use multiple times a day. Why this obsession? It served a very practical purpose. Of course, in a world without modern shampoos, and where head lice were a constant, unwelcome companion, a fine-toothed comb was the first line of defense. Archaeological digs have unearthed Viking-era combs with desiccated lice still trapped between their teeth, a 1,000-year-old testament to their effectiveness. Combing your hair wasn't just about looking good. It was about basic pest control. But it goes so much deeper than that. A comb was a deeply personal item. Many Vikings were buried with their combs, suggesting it was an object they intended to carry with them into the afterlife. The Valhalla or Folkvangiar. It was a signifier of self-respect. To have a well-made, beautifully decorated comb was to announce to the world that you were a person of substance, someone who cared for their appearance and maintained a sense of personal order in a chaotic world. It was the Viking equivalent of wearing a nice watch or carrying a designer handbag. In fact, excavations of Viking graves show that combs are one of the most common grave goods, found with both men and women across all social strata, though the quality and material would vary greatly. The exact social meaning of the comb is still debated by scholars. Was it purely a grooming tool? Was it a status symbol? Or did it have some ritualistic or amulet-icy function? Perhaps believed to ward off evil or bring good luck. The sheer number of them found in graves, often placed near the head of the deceased, suggests they held a value beyond the purely practical. Some historians theorize that the act of combing hair itself could have been a ritual, a way of ordering one's thoughts or preparing for an important event, whether a battle or a feast. You watch a small child, no older than 5 or 6, sitting on a doorstep while their mother patiently combs their fine, white blonde hair. She uses a small, sturdy comb, her movements gentle but firm. The child isn't squirming, they seem to be used to this daily ritual. It's a moment of quiet domesticity that completely shatters the berserker stereotype. It tells you that from a very young age, a Viking was taught the importance of being well-groomed. You imagine a Viking warrior preparing for a raid. He sharpens his axe, checks his shield, and then he carefully combs his beard and hair. It seems incongruous, this moment of vanity before an act of violence, but for him, it would have been part of the same process. Presenting a neat, intimidating appearance was a form of psychological warfare. A well-groomed warrior looked confident, disciplined, and successful. An unkempt one looked desperate and weak. So the comb wasn't just a tool for hygiene, it was a tool of social standing, a personal treasure, and maybe even a weapon in its own right. As you walk on, you realize you'll never look at a simple comb the same way again. It's not just for tidying hair, it's for tidying your place in the world. As you continue to absorb the rhythms of the settlement, you start to notice the subtle, and not so subtle, social hierarchies at play. It's in the way people carry themselves, the materials of their clothes, and the deference one person shows to another. And at the heart of this social structure, you realize your appearance is not just a personal choice, it's a public declaration of your legal and social status. In this world, being clean and well-groomed is, quite literally, the look of freedom. You see a group of people working near the edge of a field, hauling rocks and digging irrigation ditches. They are dressed in rough, undyed, sack-like tunics of coarse, scratchy wool. Their hair is short and tacked off, not styled. Their movements are weary, their shoulders slumped. One of them, a young man, has a simple iron collar around his neck. These are the thralls. In the Viking Age, society was rigidly divided into three main classes, a structure mythologized in the poem Rigsula. At the top were the juryless, the aristocracy. In the middle were the carls, the free farmers, merchants, and warriors, the backbone of society. And at the bottom were the thralls, the enslaved. Thralls were not a small minority, they were a cornerstone of the Viking economy. They were people captured in raids across Europe, from Ireland to Russia, or individuals who had fallen into slavery through debt or as punishment for a crime. They had no rights, owned no property, and could be bought, sold, or killed at their owner's whim, and their status was immediately visible in their appearance. Their drab, functional clothing and unkempt look were marks of their station. The thrall had neither the time, the tools, nor the permission to engage in the elaborate grooming rituals of the free. A short, practical haircut wasn't a style choice, it was a sign of servitude, making them easy to identify and control. Some sagas even describe specific thralls' work that was intentionally dirty, reinforcing their lowly status. In stark contrast, you watch a man who must be a carl walk through the settlement. He is a freeman. His tunic is made of a finer wool, dyed a respectable shade of brown using walnut shells. His trousers are well fitted, and his leather shoes look sturdy. His hair and beard, while not as elaborately decorated as some you've seen, are clean and trimmed. He walks with a purpose and a confidence that the thralls lack. He meets the eyes of those he passes. His grooming is his silent assertion, I am my own master. I own land. I have a voice at the thing, the local assembly of freemen. Then you see him, a jarl, a chieftain, emerging from the largest longhouse. The difference is staggering. He is surrounded by a small retinue of armed guards. His cloak is a deep, vibrant blue, a color notoriously expensive to produce, requiring vast quantities of the woad plant. It's fastened at the shoulder with a heavy, gilded silver brooch of breathtaking complexity. Strands of silk, imported from the Byzantine Empire, are woven into the cuffs of his tunic. His beard is not just braided, but woven with fine silver wire. His hair, a magnificent, shining blonde, is so light it seems almost unnatural. He is a walking, breathing display of wealth and power. His grooming isn't just neat, it's an ostentatious performance of his high status. Every element of his appearance is calculated to inspire awe and respect. The stark visual contrast between these three tiers of society, the jarl, the carl, and the thrall, is a powerful form of social control. In a world with no written ID cards or universal records, your body and your attire were your resume, your passport, and your legal affidavit all in one. Whether you were free or enslaved, powerful or ordinary, was written all over you for everyone to see. Of course, the lines could sometimes blur, and this is where historians find fascinating nuances. Could a carl become wealthy enough to dress like a jarl? Yes. Successful traders and warriors could accumulate great wealth. Could a thrall gain freedom? Yes. Manumission was possible, though not common. An enslaved person who was freed would likely mark their new status immediately by changing their clothes and hair. Adopting the visual language of the free, the act of grooming would be a profound, symbolic first step into a new life. On the other hand, a freeman who fell into debt and slavery would suffer the humiliation of having his hair shorn and being forced into the rough clothes of a thrall. This connection between appearance and status highlights the immense social pressure to conform to grooming standards. For a freeman, letting your appearance slide could be dangerous. It might suggest you were falling on hard times, losing control, perhaps even becoming unfree in your spirit. So the daily combing, the weekly bath, the mending of clothes, it wasn't just vanity. It was a constant, necessary performance of one's place in the rigid social order. It was the daily work of being free. You find yourself drawn back to the sight of the jarl, the chieftain, his presence still commanding the central space of the settlement. It's his hair that captivates you the most. It's not just blonde, it's an almost ethereal, silvery gold, a color that seems to capture what little light breaks through the overcast sky. You look around and notice it's a common theme. While you see plenty of redheads and brunettes, the natural hair colors of Scandinavian peoples, it's the blondes who seem to carry themselves with a particular swagger. The desire for this specific hair color is palpable. This isn't just a casual preference, it's a deep-seated cultural ideal. In the sagas and epic poems that form the bedrock of Norse mythology, the heroes and gods are frequently described with golden or light-colored hair. The god Thor is famous for his red hair. True, but the handsome god Baldur, beloved by all, is described as shining and fair. Freyja, the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, is often depicted as a stunning blonde. This divine association cemented fair hair as the pinnacle of attractiveness. It was seen as a sign of youth, health, and a certain celestial favor. For a society of farmers and seafarers living under the often gray skies of the north, an individual with bright, sun-like hair would have stood out dramatically. It became a symbol of the ideal, the extraordinary. This preference wasn't unique to the Vikings. The ancient Romans, too, were obsessed with the golden hair of the Germanic peoples they encountered, often using captured hair to make expensive wigs for Roman women. But the Vikings didn't need wigs, they had chemistry, albeit a very harsh and dangerous form of it. This cultural obsession with blonde hair created a problem. Genetics didn't cooperate. Not everyone was born with the coveted golden locks. So what do you do when reality doesn't match the beauty standard? You force it. The Vikings, both men and women who weren't blessed with naturally fair hair, developed a method to achieve it. This wasn't a gentle, store-bought hair dye with conditioner included. This was a brute force chemical treatment born of necessity and vanity. You follow the faint chemical scent that has been hanging in the air all day, leading you to a spot behind a longhouse where a woman is tending a bubbling cauldron over a low fire. She's stirring the pot with a long stick, and the mixture inside is a thick, grayish, gelatinous substance. It looks like a primordial stew, and it smells acrid and caustic. This is the secret to the jarl's golden hair. It's a special kind of soap, one with an extremely high concentration of lye, The powerful alkali was typically made from leaching water through wood ash. The Vikings had long known that mixing this lye with animal fat tallow created soap. It was a discovery that helped them with their bath day rituals and cleaning woolen textiles. But at some point, they realized that a soap with a much higher lye content than normal had a potent side effect. It was a powerful bleaching agent. By leaving this harsh, lye-heavy soap in their hair for an extended period, they could strip the natural pigment out, turning brown or red hair into a pale, straw-like blonde. The exact formula is lost to time, and historians debate the precise ingredients. Some sources suggest they might have added certain plants or minerals to enhance the effect or perhaps to try and mitigate the damage. But the core component was undeniably the caustic lye. It was a high-risk, high-reward beauty treatment. Get it right, and you achieved the divine, sun-kissed look of a Norse hero. Did it wrong, and you could end up with chemical burns on your scalp, damaged follicles, and brittle, broken hair. You can imagine the trial and error process. The first person who left the soap on a bit too long and ended up with painful sores and patches of hair falling out. Looking at the jar again, you see his hair isn't a warm, natural honey blonde. It has a slightly artificial, bleached quality to it. And now you know why. It's the product of a painful, deliberate process. This quest for golden hair reveals a core truth about Viking beauty standards. They were not about celebrating natural appearance. They were about achieving a very specific, and often unnatural, ideal. It was a form of body modification driven by cultural mythology, a willingness to endure pain and risk for the sake of conforming to an aesthetic of the gods. And this harsh chemical baptism was just one of the many painful steps they were willing to take. You approach the woman with the cauldron, keeping a respectful distance. The heat rolling off the fire is intense, and the sharp, chemical smell of the lye soap makes your eyes water. She doesn't seem to notice, her focus entirely on the task at hand. You watch as a man, a warrior by the look of his leather arm guards and the axe tucked in his belt, comes and sits on a nearby stump. His hair is a mundane, mousy brown, and he watches the bubbling concoction with a look of grim determination. This is not a spot, it's an ordeal. The woman scoops a ladle of you out of the thick, grey soap from the cauldron. It steams and globs, a foul-looking paste, with a wooden paddle. She begins to apply it to the man's hair and beard. He winces as the mixture makes contact with his scalp. You can almost feel the sensation yourself, an immediate, aggressive tingle, quickly escalating to a persistent, burning itch. This isn't the gentle foam of a modern shampoo, it's a corrosive substance, a close cousin to drain cleaner, slowly eating away at the pigment in his hair shafts. This lye-heavy soap had a dual purpose, a classic example of Viking pragmatism. While its primary cosmetic function was to bleach hair blonde, it was also an incredibly effective delicizing agent. In a world of close quarters, shared bedding, and limited laundry facilities, lice were a universal nuisance. The brutally high pH of the lye soap would have killed the lice in their eggs on contact. So, for a Viking, this painful procedure was a 2-for-1 deal. You get to look like a hero and get rid of an irritating pest at the same time. It's a bit like getting a chemical peel that also cures your acne. The motivation is twofold. The man sits stoically, his hands clenched into fists on his knees, trying to ignore the discomfort. You can see his scalp turning red and irritated under the thick paste. This process was a delicate balance. The soap had to be left on long enough to bleach the hair but washed out before it caused serious chemical burns. How did they know when it was ready? Was it a specific amount of time? Did they wait for a certain level of pain? Or did they just rinse and pray? The historical sources don't give us a detailed instruction manual, leaving us to imagine the risky guesswork involved. Historians are still discussing the social dynamics of this practice. Was it more common among men or women? The sagas and archaeological evidence, like the famous Oseberger ship burial with its trove of female beauty items, suggest that women were very concerned with their appearance. However, many historical accounts from outsiders, like the aforementioned John of Wallingford, specifically mention Viking men and their grooming habits. The desire for blonde hair seems to have been particularly strong among warriors. A band of Viking raiders, their hair and beards bleached to a uniform, startling blonde, would have presented a terrifying, almost supernatural image to their enemies. It was a form of battle-ready branding, making them look like a cohesive, otherworldly force. After what feels like an eternity, the woman gives a nod, and the man hurries to the nearby river, dunking his head into the cold water with a gasp of relief. He scrubs furiously, trying to get every last trace of the caustic soap out. When he finally stands up, his hair is plastered to his head, dripping, and it's a mess. It's a pale, sickly yellow, not the shining gold of the jarl. It will likely take a few days in the sun to lighten further into the desired shade. His scalp looks raw and painful. He has paid the price. This baptism by bleach also had another, perhaps unintended, consequence. It made the hair shaft rough and porous. This actually made it easier to style. The damaged, coarse hair would have held braids and intricate knots much better than silky, healthy hair. So the very process that damaged the hair also made it more compliant for the complex styles that were another hallmark of Viking aesthetics. It's a strange irony they had to destroy their hair in order to perfect it. You look from the man's reddened scalp back to the bubbling cauldron. This single pot of lice soap encapsulates the core of the Viking beauty ethos. It's practical, it's painful, and it's driven by a powerful, idealized image. It's a testament to human vanity and ingenuity, a willingness to suffer for a look. The pursuit of beauty here isn't about gentle enhancement, it's a chemical battle waged on one's own body. Now that you've witnessed the chemical ordeal of bleaching, you start to pay more attention to how the Vikings style the hair they've worked so hard to color. It's not enough for it to be blonde, it has to be controlled, shaped, and presented in a very specific way. This is where the artistry comes in, a form of personal expression that is both beautiful and deeply practical, especially in a warrior culture. You see a group of men sitting outside a longhouse, sharpening their weapons, but one of them is leaning forward while another stands behind him, his fingers moving deftly through the first man's long, bleached hair. HES, not just combing it, HES weaving it. He pulls sections tight, his knuckles sure and steady, creating intricate braids that lie flat against the scalp. These aren't the simple, single plaits you might imagine. They are complex patterns, sometimes multiple braids running along the sides of the head, culminating in a single, thick tail at the back. It's a style you might recognize from modern television shows, but here it is in its original context, a living tradition. For a Viking warrior, this wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a matter of life and death on the battlefield. Long, loose hair is a liability in close combat. It can be grabbed by an enemy, or it can fall into your eyes at a critical moment, obscuring your vision for the split second it takes for a sword or axe to find its mark. Braiding the hair tightly kept it out of the way, ensuring a clear line of sight and removing a potential handhold for an opponent. Some styles even involved shaving the back and sides of the head, leaving a long, dramatic plume of hair on top that could be braided. This style, famously depicted on the 11th century, based tapestry though on Normans, who were of Viking descent, would have been both practical and visually intimidating. But the braids were more than just functional. They were a canvas for decoration. You watch as the man finishes his friend's hair, and then produces small leather pouch. From it, he takes out a few small, colored glass beads into thin metal ring. He carefully threads them onto the end of the braid, securing them with a knot. Now, when the warrior moves his head, there's a subtle flash of color, a glint of metal. It's a small touch, but it speaks volumes about personal pride. These decorations could be simple, like colored thread, or as elaborate as custom-made silver or gold rings. They were a way to display wealth and individuality within the confines of a uniform warrior aesthetic. Viking women's hairstyles were equally, if not more, elaborate. You see a woman of high status, her hair a testament to her station. It's parted in the middle and swept up into a complex knot at the back of her head, a style sometimes called a knot of the noblewoman. The knot itself is intricate, looped and twisted, and held in place with long, decorated pins made of bronze or silver. Draping from the knot are fine silk ribbons, another sign of immense wealth, as silk was a precious import from the Far East. According to some historical interpretations of carvings and other depictions, married women would typically wear their hair up and doffed uncovered with a cap or a veil, while unmarried girls were allowed to wear it long and loose. The level of detail in these hairstyles suggests they took a significant amount of time and often required the help of another person. It was a social activity, a moment for friends or family members to sit together, groom one another, and exchange news. The exact diversity of styles is something scholars still piece together from fragmentary evidence, small figurines, carved picture stones, and the occasional well-preserved bog body. We don't have a Viking-era style book, so historians have to reconstruct these looks, and there is still much debate. For example, were certain braid patterns specific to a clan or region? Did a particular style signify a warrior's rank or number of battles won? We can only speculate. What's certain is that hair was a primary medium for social signaling. It communicated status, marital standing, and occupation. A warrior's braids were a sign of his readiness for battle. A noblewoman's elaborate knot was a sign of her family's wealth and her position in society. Even the act of loosing one's hair could be a powerful symbol. A woman letting her hair down could be an act of mourning or emotional distress. A warrior unbraiding his hair after a battle was a sign of returning to a state of peace. You realize that in this world, hair is a language. It is carefully composed each day to send a clear message. The combination of the chemically achieved color and the meticulously crafted style creates a powerful statement, one that projects an image of discipline, pride, and, when needed, terrifying ferocity. Your gaze shifts from the intricately braided hair to the men's faces, and you notice the other dominant feature of Viking masculinity, the beard. In this society, a man's beard is not just facial hair, it is a profound symbol of honor, maturity, and virility. A full, well-kept beard is the definitive mark of a man, so much so that one of the worst insults you could levy against a Viking male was to call him beardless. It was an accusation of being unmanly, boyish, or even effeminate. You watch two men talking near a stack of firewood. Both have impressive beards, but they are styled in completely different ways, reflecting their personalities. One has a wild, bushy red beard that seems to explode from his face. Yet even this wild look is deceptive. You can see it's been trimmed to be fuller on the sides, and it's clean, remarkably so. The other man has a more controlled, spade-shaped beard, dark and dense, that has been carefully oiled to give it a slight sheen. It's clear they spend a significant amount of time on their facial hair. Just as with the hair on their heads, beards were a canvas for style and decoration. They were combed daily, washed regularly, and often trimmed and shaped with small, sharp knives or shears. The most common insults in the sagas often revolve around beards. Nicknames could be cruel. A man with a sparse or patchy beard might be mockingly called skegg-gloss as beardless. There are even accounts in the law codes where insulting a man's beard could lead to a fine or even a duel. It was an attack on his core identity. You see a warrior, perhaps the same one who just had his hair braided, now tending to his beard. He uses a small, fine-toothed comb, smaller than the one for his hair, to work through the tangles. Then, he applies a small amount of some kind of wax or oil from a little wooden pot. This would help to tame stray hairs, give it shape, and also condition it against the harsh, wind-whipped sea air. The ingredients of these beard oils are lost to time, but they likely would have been made from beeswax and perhaps animal fats, scented with local herbs like bog myrtle or yarrow. The ultimate expression of beard vanity, however, was in its decoration. You spot a man with a particularly magnificent beard woven into two distinct plates. At the end of each plate is a small, hollow metal bead. These are beard beads or beard rings, small artifacts that archaeologists occasionally find in Viking graves. They could be simple bronze rings or elaborate, twisted silver wires. The act of braiding and beading a beard was a bold statement. It said, "I have such a magnificent beard that it is worthy of jewelry. It is one of my treasures." The social significance of the beard is a topic that still intrigues historians. Was there a certain age when a boy growing his first beard was considered a man? Almost certainly. Did different beard styles signify allegiance to a certain chieftain or region? This is harder to prove, but entirely possible. Some scholars argue that the forked beard, often depicted in Viking art, was a popular style, while others suggest this might just be an artistic convention. The famous Lewis chessmen, found in Scotland but of Norse origin, show kings and warriors with long, braided beards, giving us a tangible, if stylized, glimpse into this world. The beard also served a practical purpose, providing a layer of insulation against the brutal cold of a Scandinavian winter. But its social function far outweighed its practical one. Think again of the battlefield. A warrior with a long, braided, and beaded beard, his hair also braided and bleached, would be a terrifying sight. The beard added to the ferocity of his war face, making him look older, stronger, and more formidable. Interestingly, this reverence for beards was universal in the Viking world, while it was the dominant look in Scandinavia. Vikings who settled in other lands often adapted to local customs. For example, the Rus Vikings who traveled east into what is now Russia and Ukraine were often described by local and Byzantine sources as being clean-shaven or having only mustaches, adopting Slavic or Eastern customs. This adaptability shows that while the beard was the ideal at home, the Vikings were also pragmatic cultural chameleons when it suited their needs as traders or mercenaries abroad. Back in this harbor settlement, however, the beard is king. It's a man's pride, his statement of identity, and a key component of his perceived attractiveness and authority. To be beardless was to be a boy. To have a glorious beard, combed, oiled, and perhaps even decorated, was to be a man in the fullest sense of the word. As your eyes become more attuned to the subtle details of Viking grooming, you notice something else. Something that frames their faces and gives their gaze an unnerving intensity. It's not just the wind-weathered skin or the steely set of their jaws. It's their eyes. Many of them, both men and women, have their eyes lined with a dark, sooty substance. It's a deliberate, dramatic look that makes their eyes pop. An ancient form of eyeliner that feels both strangely familiar and strikingly exotic in this rugged setting. You watch a woman sitting on a bench, grinding something in a small stone bowl with a pestle, just reducing a lump of dark, crumbly material into a fine powder. Another woman sits beside her, holding a small, polished piece of metal that serves as a mirror. The first woman dips a thin, carved bone stick into the powder, taps off the excess, and then carefully applies it to her eyelids, tracing the lash line. The effect is immediate. Her eyes, already a pale, piercing blue, now look larger, sharper, and profoundly more intense. It's a look that says, "I see you," and it's slightly intimidating. This substance is coal, a cosmetic that has a history stretching back thousands of years to ancient Egypt. It's not something you typically associate with Vikings, but evidence suggests it was very much a part of their beauty toolkit. The primary ingredient was typically galena lead sulfide, which creates a dark gray or black pigment. Sometimes it was made from antimony sulfide or even simple soot scraped from the bottom of a cooking pot, mixed with a little animal fat to create a paste. The use of coal in the Viking world was likely another cultural import, picked up through their extensive trade and trading routes. Viking traders traveled as far as Constantinople, which they called Ikael Agard, the great city, and the bustling markets of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. There, they would have encountered men and women of the Byzantine and Arab worlds who regularly used coal to adorn their eyes. The Vikings, ever the opportunists, saw something they liked and adopted it. An Arab traveler, Ibrahim al-Tartashi, who visited the Viking trading town of Hidibai in the 10th century, specifically noted that both men and women wore artificial eye makeup. His tone was one of mild surprise, further proof that this wasn't just a modern fantasy projected onto the past. But why did they wear it for women? The reason seems straightforward. It was a beautifying agent, a way to enhance their features, much like eyeliner is used today. It aligned with the broader aesthetic of looking striking and well put together. For the men, the motivation was likely more complex. On one hand, it was simple vanity. A Viking man who bleached his hair and braided his beard was clearly not shy about cosmetic enhancement. Lining his eyes was just one more step in crafting a handsome and imposing appearance. On the other hand, it almost certainly had a psychological function in warfare. Imagine a shield wall of Viking warriors. They are large men, their hair and beards bleached and braided, and as they scream their war cries, their eyes, heavily lined with black coal, seem to burn with a furious, almost inhuman intensity. It's theatrical, it's psychological warfare. It dehumanizes them slightly, making them look more like demons or spirits of war than mere men. It's the same principle behind modern soldiers wearing camouflage face paint. It breaks up the familiar lines of the human face and creates a more intimidating persona. There were also potential health benefits, or at least perceived ones. In hot, sunny climates like Egypt, coal was believed to reduce the glare of the sun on the eyes. While Scandinavia isn't exactly known for its scorching sun, the glare off snow or water can be intense. The lead-based compounds in ancient coal also have mild antibacterial properties. Historians and scientists still debate whether this was a primary reason for its use, but it's possible the Vikings believed it helped to prevent eye infections, a constant danger in a smoky, dusty environment. This theory is controversial, especially given that we now know lead is highly toxic. The irony is that this beauty practice was a slow poison. The regular application of lead-based coal would have led to lead being absorbed into the bloodstream. Over time, this could cause a host of health problems, from headaches and irritability to serious neurological damage and even death. They were, in essence, sacrificing their long-term health for the immediate benefits of a striking appearance and a fierce war face. They had no concept of heavy metal poisoning. Of course, to them, it was just a dark, magical powder that made them look more beautiful and more terrifying. You look again at the woman finishing her makeup. She blinks, admiring her reflection in the polished metal. She looks powerful, confident, and a little dangerous. Her gaze is a perfect illustration of the Viking paradox, a culture that valued strength and survival, yet was willing to embrace pain, risk, and even poison in its relentless pursuit of a very specific and very brutal kind of beauty. You've accustomed yourself to the bleached hair, the intricate braids, and the coal-lined eyes. You think you've finally cracked the code of Viking aesthetics. Then, a man walks past you, close enough for you to see the details of his face. He is broad-shouldered, his beard neatly trimmed. He offers you a brief, almost dismissive smile as he passes, and in that fleeting moment, you see something so utterly bizarre and unsettling that you stop in your tracks. His front teeth are not smooth and white. Carved into the enamel of his upper incisors are a series of deep, horizontal grooves, 3 perfect, parallel lines running across the surface of each tooth. They are too precise to be accidental, too uniform to be the result of wear and tear. It's intentional, it's deliberate, and it looks incredibly painful. The man continues on his way, oblivious to your shock, but the image is seared into your brain. It's a detail so strange, so out of place with everything you thought you knew, that it feels like a glitch in history. You start looking for it, and now that you know what to watch for, you see it again. Another warrior, laughing with his companions, reveals a similar pattern this time. 2 grooves on each tooth. A slightly older man, his teeth worn, still has the faint but unmistakable trace of these intentional markings. It seems to be a custom exclusively for men. You haven't seen it on any of the women. This isn't a flight of fancy. This is one of the most startling and intimate discoveries in modern Viking archaeology. Across Scandinavia, particularly on the Swedish island of Gotland, archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of male skulls from the Viking Age with these exact dental modifications. These aren't just a few isolated cases, it's a clear cultural practice. A form of body modification more permanent and painful than any haircut or braid. You try to imagine the process. There is no anesthetic here, no high-speed dental drill. There is only a man, a friend or a specialized craftsman, holding a small, sharp metal flail. The man wanting the modification has to sit perfectly still, his jaw clenched, enduring the horrific, grating sensation of a file being scraped across the front of his teeth. The sound alone would be enough to make you shudder. Then, there's the pain, not just the immediate, jarring agony of the filing itself, but the lingering sensitivity afterward, as the protective layer of enamel is scraped away, exposing the more sensitive dentin beneath. The precision required is astonishing. The grooves are often perfectly parallel and evenly spaced. This suggests it was done by a skilled individual, someone who had practiced and perfected this strange, gruesome art. It would have taken time, patience, and an incredible tolerance for pain on the part of the recipient. Why would anyone voluntarily subject themselves to this? What possible reason could there be for carving lines into your own teeth? This is where the real mystery begins, and it's a question that has historians and archaeologists locked in a fascinating debate. There are no written records from the Vikings themselves explaining this practice. We have the what, the physical evidence on the skulls, but we don't have the why. So, we are left with theories, each one painting a different picture of the Viking psyche. The most popular theory is that these dental grooves were a mark of status, specifically for a certain group of warriors or perhaps an exclusive guild of merchants. In a society so focused on visual signaling, modifying your teeth in such a permanent and painful way would be the ultimate commitment. It's a mark that can't be taken off like a cloak or washed out like hair dye. It says, I belong to a special group, and I endured a painful initiation to prove my worth. It would be an instant identifier, letting anyone who saw your smile know that you were part of a select brotherhood. Another theory leans into the Viking reputation for ferocity. Imagine facing a warrior in battle. He grins at you, and you see these strange, unnatural lines on his teeth. It's alien. It's intimidating. It's designed to unsettle you, to make you hesitate for a crucial second. It's a form of psychological warfare, written on the very bones of his face. But, as you'll soon discover, the intimidation factor might have been even greater than just the lines themselves. The real shock might have been what they put in the lines. For now, all you know is that the Viking smile isn't just a smile. It's a statement, carved in bone. You can't shake the image of that man's smile. They replace in your mind the deliberate, unnatural lines etched into his teeth. The initial shock gives way to a gnawing, visceral curiosity. In a world without modern dentistry, without anesthetic, without any concept of sterile equipment, was this even possible? Your imagination begins to fill in the blanks, and the picture it paints is one of supreme endurance and unwavering commitment. Let's pull back the curtain on this procedure. There is no bright, clean room. The setting is likely the open air on a clear day for better light, or perhaps the smoky interior of a longhouse. The patient's head held near the fire for illumination. The dentist is not a medical professional, but a craftsman, an artisan whose skill lies not in healing, but in marking. He might be a blacksmith who forges the tools, or a bone carver who understands precision. His hands are steady, his eye for detail renowned throughout the community. The tool itself is simple, a small metal file, probably made of iron. It's not a specialized dental instrument. It's likely the same kind of tool used for sharpening a knife's edge, smoothing a rivet on a shield, or engraving a pattern onto a piece of antler. It is hard, rough, and unforgiving. Now, picture the scene. The recipient is on a loose to lower log, his head tilted back. A friend or two might be present, not for comfort, but to help hold him steady. There is no numbing agent, no shot of Novocaine, no swig of strong alcohol that would do anything more than take the slightest edge off a terror that alcohol couldn't possibly touch. This is an experience to be met with pure, unadulterated willpower. The craftsman leans in, his grip firm on the file. He places the edge against the smooth, virgin surface of a front incisor. The recipient takes a deep breath, his knuckles white as he grips his own knees. And then, the work begins. The sound is the first violation, a high-pitched, grating scrape of metal against enamel. It's a sound that seems to bypass the ears and travel directly up the jawbone into the skull. It's the sound of something pristine being deliberately ruined. With each pass of the file, a fine white powder of tooth dust coats the man's lip. A vibration shudders through his entire head. Then comes the pain. At first, it's a jarring, unpleasant pressure, but as the file works its way through the hard outer layer of enamel, it begins to reach the more sensitive dentin beneath. Sharp, shooting jolts of pain, like tiny lightning strikes, begin to fire along the nerve pathways. Every push of the file is a fresh wave of agony. The man's eyes are squeezed shut, sweat beading on his forehead, but he does not move. To flinch, to pull away, would be to ruin the design, to mar the very symbol of fortitude he is trying to earn. His stillness is part of the ritual. The craftsman is methodical, focused. He works slowly, stopping to wipe away the tooth powder, checking the depth and straightness of the line. He has to create not just one, but 2, 3, maybe even 4 grooves, all perfectly parallel. The level of control, from both the filer and the one being filed, is immense. This is not a quick, rough and ready modification. It is a painstaking act of human sculpting. Archaeologists debate the exact context of this practice. Was it a public spectacle, a rite of passage for a group of young warriors to prove their courage, or was it a more private affair, done within the confines of a specific fraternity or guild? The sheer pain and physical risk involved a crack tooth, or a subsequent infection could be a death sentence, suggests it was not undertaken lightly. It was a permanent mark, a physical record of a moment of extreme trial, worn for all to see. And the pain doesn't end when the craftsman puts down his file. The newly exposed dentin would be excruciatingly sensitive. For weeks, every sip of cold river water, every breath of frigid winter air, every bite of hot stew would send a fresh jolt of pain through the man's jaw. Eating would be an ordeal. This lingering agony was part of the price. Looking at the men in this settlement who bear these marks, you see them in a new light. They are not just warriors or traders. They are men who have willingly subjected themselves to a form of ritualized torture for the sake of their identity. They have traded comfort for belonging, and smooth teeth for a symbol of their elite status. The carving on their teeth is more than just a decoration. It is a biography of their pain and a testament to their resolve, filed directly into bone. Now that you've grappled with the brutal how of the dental filing, the why becomes even more pressing. Why endure that grating file, that nerve, treating pain, that lingering sensitivity? The grooves themselves are shocking enough, but you start to wonder if there's more to the story. Were these channels, carved so painstakingly into the enamel, meant to be left empty, or were they designed to hold something? This is where the theory and speculation get really colorful. Many archaeologists and historians believe that the grooves were not the final product, but rather a preparation. They were channels designed to be filled with pigment, turning a subtle modification into a truly terrifying spectacle. Imagine that warrior's smile again. But this time, the horizontal lines carved into his teeth are not just dark shadows. They are filled with a vibrant, unnatural color. What kind of pigments would they have used? The primary candidate is charcoal or soot, mixed with a binder like resin from a pine tree or beeswax. This would create a stark, black paste that could be packed into the grooves. When the warrior smiled or shouted a war cry, he would reveal a set of teeth that looked like a barred cage, a black and white pattern of terrifying geometry. The visual shock would be immense. It's one thing to see filed teeth, it's another to see them striped in jet black. But it might not have stopped at black. The Vikings were masters of creating color from natural sources for their textiles. They could produce a deep, blood red from the madder root. They could make a startling yellow from the weld plant. It's entirely plausible that they used these same pigments, ground into a fine powder and mixed with the binder, to fill the dental grooves. A warrior could have, in theory, sported a smile with bright red stripes. The symbolism would be obvious and potent to man whose very teeth seemed to be stained with blood. This theory, while dramatic, is incredibly difficult to prove archaeologically. After 1,000 years in the ground, any organic material like pigment and binder would have long since degraded and washed away. We are left with the empty grooves, the smoking gun without the bullet. Scientists have tried to analyze the microscopic scratches within the grooves for any trace mineral residue. Some studies have found hints of charcoal, lending credence to the black stripes theory, but the evidence is not yet conclusive. It remains one of the most hotly debated topics in Viking studies, a frustration for researchers, but a fantastic playground for the imagination. Let's assume for a moment the pigment theory is true. The social implications are huge. It elevates the dental filing from a subtle mark of belonging to a dynamic form of self-expression. Did different colors signify different ranks within a warrior band? Did a man with one black stripe on his teeth answer to a man with 3 red ones? It's a tantalizing possibility. It would create a whole visual language of hierarchy and achievement, readable only to those in the know. It also provides a stronger explanation for the practice as a tool of intimidation. The goal might not have been just to look tough, but to look fundamentally unhuman. An enemy soldier in England or France, facing a Viking for the first time, would be confronted by a being with bleached blonde hair, kohl-rimmed eyes, denel, teeth striped in black or red. This isn't just a man anymore, it's a monster, a demon from the pagan north. The psychological impact would have been devastating, potentially causing panic and breaking a defensive line before the first blow was even struck. But there's a counter-argument. Some historians suggest a more practical, less theatrical purpose. What if the grooves were simply a way for a specific group of long-distance merchants to recognize each other in foreign ports? In this scenario, the filing is a secret handshake, a permanent membership card. The pain of the procedure ensures that only the truly committed would join this exclusive trading guild. They wouldn't need colored pigments to stand out. The subtle mark would be enough for a fellow member to spot across a crowded marketplace from Constantinople to Dublin. This theory is less cinematic, but it aligns perfectly with the Viking identity as savvy, globe-trotting traders. Ultimately, we don't have the final answer. The secret of the grooves was buried with the men who bore them. Were they status symbols, terrifying war paint, a merchant's guild mark, or something else entirely? We haven't even conceived of. Every skull that is unearthed with these modifications adds another voice to the silent chorus. But the song they are singing is in a language we have yet to fully decipher. You look at a passing warrior, his mouth firmly closed, and you wonder what secrets his smile is hiding. You tear your gaze away from the unsettling mystery of the filed teeth and take a broader look at the people around you. You notice their skin. It's not the smooth, airbrushed skin of a modern magazine cover. It's the skin of people who live their lives outdoors, at the mercy of the elements. It's a canvas telling a story of sun, wind, and brutal cold. The faces of the sailors and farmers are a roadmap of their existence. Their foreheads are creased, and their eyes are framed by deep lines, etched by years of squinting into the glare off the water or the blinding snow. Their skin has a tough, leathery texture, chapped by the relentless, salty wind that whips across the fjords. In the summer, it would be sunburned and peeling in the winter, runned cracked with cold. The tip of a man's nose is reddened coarse, evidence of countless near frostbitten days on the deck of a long ship. This is a world without sunscreen, without sophisticated moisturizers, without any of the protective barriers we take for granted. So how did they cope? What did they do to protect their skin from the constant assault of the northern climate? Their solutions were, as with so many things, practical, resourceful, and derived from the world around them. The most basic and readily available skin protectant would have been animal fat. After butchering a sheep, a cow, or even a seal, the rendered fat, tallow, or lard would have been a valuable commodity. While much of it was used for cooking or making soap and candles, some would have been set aside for personal use. You can imagine a Viking, before heading out for a day of fishing in the winter, smearing a layer of greasy, unslatted animal fat over his exposed face and hands. It wouldn't have been pleasant. It would be thick, smelly, and attract dirt, but it would create a crude but effective barrier against wind, burn, and frostbite, trapping a layer of moisture against the skin. They may also have used more refined substances. Lanolin, the grease extracted from sheep's wool, is a powerful emollient that is still used in skincare products today. While the Vikings wouldn't have had the chemical processes to refine it to a modern standard, a crude, waxy version could have been obtained simply by handling and processing large amounts of raw wool. It would have had a very strong, sheepy smell, but it would have worked wonders on chapped hands and cracked lips. Beyond simple fats, they likely turned to the local flora. Northern Europe is rich in plants with soothing properties. They might have created poultices or balms from herbs like yarrow, Achilleum dilophilius, which has anti-inflammatory properties and was known in Old Norse as rt wound wort, suggesting they were well aware of its healing capabilities. Comfrey, with its reputation for mending skin, or the gel-like substance from the leaves of marshmallows, could have been used to soothe sunburns and other irritations. The exact recipes for these Viking-era skincare products are, of course, lost to time. We don't have medieval Norse scrolls detailing 10 tips for glowing skin. Our knowledge is based on a combination of archaeological findings like preserved plant matter in graves, analysis of later medieval texts, and ethnobotanic knowledge of the region. Historians debate how widespread and sophisticated this herbal skincare was. Was it common knowledge for every household, or was it the specialized domain of a local wise woman, or healer? The truth is likely somewhere in between. A farmer's wife would have known which leads to crush to soothe the burn, just as she knew which mushrooms were safe to eat. What's clear is that their concept of good skin was likely very different from ours. They wouldn't have been striving for a flawless, porcelain complexion. That was an ideal for southern aristocrats who never saw the sun. For a Viking, healthy skin meant functional skin. It meant skin that wasn't cracked and bleeding, skin that could withstand the cold, skin that healed quickly from a cut or a scrape. A weathered, tanned face was not a sign of damage. It was a sign of a life lived, of experience, of time spent working and traveling in the great outdoors. It was a mark of authenticity. So while they may have lacked our modern lotions and creams, they were not passive victims of their environment. They used the resources at their disposal, the fat from their animals, the weeds from their fields, to maintain their bodies as best they could. It was a practical, unglamorous form of self-care, aimed not at achieving an impossible ideal of perfection, but at the more fundamental goal of getting through the day and the season with your skin intact. You've observed their hair, their teeth, their skin. Now your attention is drawn to the men's bodies, to the stories told not just on their faces, but across their arms, chests, and backs. You see a man by the water's edge, his tunic off as he mends a fishing net. His back is a tapestry of pale, silvery lines against his tanned skin. They are scars, not the small, incidental scars of a clumsy cook or careless craftsman, that lie, dramatic marks of a blade. One slices diagonally across his shoulder blade, another, a puckered, star-shaped wound, sits just above his hip. He turns, and you see more on his arms and chest. These are not marks of shame. He doesn't hide them. In fact, he seems completely unconcerned by their presence, as if they are as much a part of him as his hands or his feet. A younger man works nearby, his skin smooth and largely unblemished. He looks at the older warrior's scarred torso not with pity, but with a clear, undisguised admiration. In that single glance, you understand a fundamental truth of this culture, one that is completely inverted from your modern sensibilities. Here, for a man, a scar is not a disfigurement. It is a jewel. In the Viking world, a man's worth was intrinsically tied to his reputation. His due, mister. This was the judgment of his character, and deeds that would live on after he died. For a warrior, the path to a good reputation was paved with acts of courage, strength, and martial prowess, and the most undeniable, irrefutable proof of that prowess was a collection of scars. A scar was a receipt. It was physical evidence that said, I was in a battle. I faced a man with an axe or a sword. I fought. I bled. And I survived. A smooth-skinned, unblemished man of fighting age might be handsome, but he was also untested. His story was unwritten. He was a blank page. A heavily scarred warrior, by contrast, was a living legend, a walking, breathing saga of his own adventures. Each scar had a story, a tale that could be told and retold around the fire in the longhouse on a cold winter's night. This one, he might say, pointing to a gash on his forearm, I got from a Frankish champion on the banks of the Seine. There, this puckered mark is where an Irish spear point was stopped by my mail shirt, but not before it tasted my blood. This created a culture where scars were not just accepted but actively desired. They were the ultimate status symbol, more valuable than a silver arm ring or a fine cloak. Because they couldn't be bought or inherited, they had to be earned, paid for in pain and blood. This mindset is captured in the Old Norse literature. In the saga of Grettir the Strong, the hero Grettir is admired for his many impressive wounds. In the famous poem Havermal, which offers wisdom and advice for living, there's an implicit understanding that the life of a worthy man involves conflict and hardship. The very concept of what was considered beautiful or attractive in a man was therefore radically different. While a woman's beauty might be tied to clear skin, healthy hair, and a strong physique, a man's attractiveness was linked to his demonstrated ability to endure and inflict violence. The scarred warrior was the alpha male. He had proven his worth, his courage, his luck, and his ability to protect his family and community. He was a survivor. What could be more attractive than that in such a dangerous world? Of course, not all scars were created equal. The location of a scar was crucial. A scar on the chest, the arms, or the front of the head was a mark of honor. It meant you faced your enemy head-on. A scar on your back was a mark of profound shame. There was evidence that you were struck down while fleeing, that you had turned your back on the enemy. It was a brand of cowardice that would follow you for the rest of your life. This distinction is a recurring theme in many warrior cultures throughout history, from the Romans to the samurai, and the Vikings were no exception. The historical debate around this topic often centers on exaggeration versus reality. Did Vikings actively seek out fights just to get scarred? Probably. Not. The risk of death was too high. But did they display the scars they earned with immense pride? Absolutely. Some scholars wonder if there was an element of ritual scarification, distinct from battle wounds. but the evidence for this is thin and highly speculative. The vast majority of these marks were the unplanned, chaotic results of real combat. You look again at the man mending his net. His movements are fluid and efficient, his hands strong and calloused. His scarred back is not a sign of victimhood, it is a resume of his entire life, a testament to his resilience. In this world, beauty isn't about perfection, it's about the story your body tells. And for a Viking man, the most beautiful story was one of survival. You begin to see the scarred warriors not as damaged goods, but as walking chronicles, their bodies serving as leather-bound books of their own histories. With this new understanding, you start to learn how to read their skin. It's a language written in healed flesh, and every mark tells the story of a different weapon, a different battle, a different brush with the afterlife. You observe a veteran warrior, a man whose gray, streaked beard speaks of many winters. He is showing a group of young, eager boys how to properly hold a shield. As he moves, his tunic shifts, revealing a landscape of old injuries. You can start to differentiate them. There are the long, clean lines, the signature of a sharp sword. A sword cut, if it didn't sever a limb or hit a vital organ, would often heal into a relatively neat, silvery scar. You see a particular long one running down his bicep. You can almost picture the moment it happened, a parry that wasn't quite fast enough, a glancing blow from a longsworth that sliced through his mail, shirting deep into the muscle. Then there are the different, more brutal marks of an axe. An axe doesn't slice its chops, it crushes bone and tears flesh. The scars left by an axe are often wider, more ragged, and uglier. You see a jagged, crescent-shaped scar on the veteran's collarbone. It's the calling card of a Viking battle axe, a blow that would have been aimed at his neck or head, but was deflected by his shield at the last second. The force of it would have been staggering, shattering his collarbone and leaving a wound that would have taken months to heal if it didn't fester and kill him first. And then there are the small, puckered circles. These are the marks of a spear. A spear wound was particularly dangerous because of the risk of deep infection. You see a cluster of these old puncture wounds on his thigh, evidence of a moment when he might have fallen or his shield was broken, and he was jabbed repeatedly by spearmen trying to finish him off. Each one is a small miracle, a thrust that missed the femoral artery by a mere inch. Reading these scars becomes a way of understanding the brutal physics of Viking combat. It wasn't the elegant, swirling sword play of a movie. It was a close, grim, and powerful business. It was about the crushing force of the axe, the piercing thrust of the spear, and the swift, decisive cut of the sword, all taking place in the terrifying chaos of the shield wall, where men stood shoulder to shoulder, pushing and hacking at the enemy line just feet away. The social aspect of this reading is paramount. When two warriors meet for the first time, they aren't just looking at each other's faces. They are subconsciously cataloging each other's scars. It's a silent, instant assessment of experience. A man with many scars, particularly on his front, is immediately afforded a level of respect. He doesn't need to boast about his exploits, his body has already done the talking. He has survived the ultimate test multiple times. His advice on the battlefield would be heeded. His place by the fire would be one of honor. This scar reading is a complex and nuanced field of study for historians. How did the Vikings themselves differentiate between a lucky scar, a minor wound from a major battle, and an unlucky one, a serious wound from a foolish skirmish? The sagas give us clues. They often describe wounds in great detail, linking them to specific, famous battles or duels. A scar from the Battle of Stamford Bridge, for example, would carry far more prestige than one from a drunken tavern brawl. The story behind the scar was as important as the scar itself. This is a point of academic discussion. To what extent did men embellish the origins of their scars to enhance their reputation? It's likely that a small cut received while repairing a fence could, in the retelling, become a heroic wound from a skirmish with Saxon pirates. You watch as one of the boys traces the path of a long scar on the veteran's arm, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reverence. The veteran smiles, a gruff, eternal expression, and begins to tell the story. The scar is no longer just a mark of injury. It is a teaching tool, a piece of oral history, a direct physical link to the past. It connects the boy to the world of his fathers and grandfathers, a world where courage was currency and your body was the ledger. The warrior's body is his resume, and it's a resume that is impossible to fake. Every entry is paid for in blood, and every line item tells a potential employer or ally everything they need to know about his qualifications. In this culture, the most beautiful man is not the one with the most flawless skin, but the one with the most compelling and terrifying story written upon it. You've been so focused on the men, their beards, their braids, their battle scars that you realize you've been neglecting the other half of the population. You turn your attention to the Viking women, and you find a different but equally compelling standard of beauty at play. It's less about brutal modification and stern disfigurement, and more about projecting health, wealth, and strength of a different kind. You observe a woman who is clearly of high status, perhaps the wife of the Jarl. She is not delicate or waifish. The ideal of beauty here is not fragility. She is tall and strong-looking, with broad shoulders and capable hands. In a society where life is physically demanding for everyone, a healthy, robust physique is a sign of good breeding and the ability to run a large household, manage farmsteads, and raise strong children. A woman who looked too thin or frail might be seen as sickly or coming from a poor family that couldn't afford to feed her well. The Norse sagas often describe their heroines as being fair and strong or the most handsome of women and also very sturdy. Beauty and strength were not opposing qualities, they were intertwined. Her skin, unlike the men's, is more protected from the elements. While she is by no means idle, her work is centered more around the longhouse and the enclosed land of the steeding. She has a clearer complexion, a sign of her domestic authority. Her hair, a rich brown, is not bleached, but it is impeccably styled. It's woven into a complex series of knots and braids, coiled at the nape of her neck and secured with long, elegant pins made of polished bone. Her hair is upright, but unlike the man, its primary purpose isn't to be battle-ready, but to be a symbol of her station and ordered domestic life. Her clothing is where her family's wealth is truly put on display. She wears a long linen underdress, or a sirke. Over this, she wears a woolen, dress-like garment, often called a hangeroke or apron dress, which is suspended by two straps over her shoulders. This is the iconic female garment of the Viking Age. The straps are not just pinned, but are held in place by a pair of large, magnificent brooches. These aren't small, delicate pins, they are massive, ornate pieces of bronze or silver, often shaped like turtles or discs, and intricately decorated with animal motifs and geometric patterns. They are the centerpiece of her entire outfit. Draped between these two brooches are strings of colorful glass beads, amber, and jet. Some of the glass beads are simple, but others are complex millefiori beads, imported at great expense from workshops in southern Europe or the Middle East. The amber, with its warm, honey-like glow, comes from the distant shores of the Baltic Sea. Each bead represents a transaction, a journey, a piece of the vast Viking trade network. Her necklace is not just an accessory, it's a map of her world and a statement of her husband's success. The debate among historians regarding women's roles and aesthetics is lively. While the popular image is of the shield maiden, a female warrior fighting alongside the men, the archaeological evidence for this is sparse and highly contested. The discovery of a 10th century grave in Burka, Sweden known as BJ 581, containing a skeleton buried with a full set of weapons, was long thought to be the definitive proof of a high-ranking female warrior. However, osteological analysis has been debated, and many scholars argue that the vast majority of women's lives were defined not by the sword, but by the spindle, the loom, and the keys to the longhouse. A powerful woman was the one who held the keys, symbolizing her authority over the household and its provisions. Her beauty standard, therefore, is not one of martial ferocity, but of domestic power and prosperity. While a man's body tells the story of the battles he has survived, a woman's attire tells the story of the wealth he has accumulated. She is the family's bank account, wearing its fortune for all to see. Her strong build speaks of her ability to bear healthy children and manage the considerable labor of a Viking Age farm. Her intricate hairstyle and expensive jewelry speak of a household so prosperous that she has the leisure time and the resources to dedicate to such adornment. You see a younger, unmarried girl walk by. Her hair is worn long and flowing. Unburdened by the complex knots of the married woman, she wears a single string of simple, locally made glass beads. Her dress is a more modest color. Her appearance clearly signals her status young, available, and from a family of more moderate means. The female beauty ideal is a complex blend of nature and nurture. It starts with a foundation of good health and a strong body, and then builds upon it with layers of wealth, status, and social position, all communicated through a sophisticated language of clothing, hair, and jewelry. It is a beauty that is just as compelling and just as tied to the core values of their society as the men's, but its vocabulary is entirely different. You continue to watch the Jar Ellis wife as she directs the work of several thralls, her movements economical and authoritative. Your eyes are fixed on the cascade of beads hanging between the magnificent brooches on her chest. You realize you're not just looking at jewelry. You're looking at a savings account, an insurance policy, and a resume, all rolled into one. In a world without banks, stock markets, or even a standardized currency in the early Viking Age, wealth was something you could hold, something you could wear. This is the concept of portable wealth, and it was central to the Viking economy and social structure. The primary measure of wealth was not in land, which was often communally held by a family or clan, but in movable goods, livestock, weapons, and, most visibly, precious metals and other valuable objects. A person's entire net worth, or at least a significant portion of it, could be worn on their body. Look closer at the woman's brooches. They are cast in heavy bronze, maybe even solid silver. They are functional, holding her dress up, but their size and intricacy are far beyond what is necessary for the job. They are a statement. They say, "My family has so much surplus wealth that we can afford to have this much metal, crafted by a skilled artisan, just to hold up my clothes." Dangling from one of the brooches, you see a set of small tools on a chain, a tiny pair of shears, a miniature ear spoon, and a small knife, all made of silver. They are practical, yes, but they are also a form of conspicuous consumption. The strings of beads are another layer of this financial story. Glass was a luxury item. While some simple beads were made locally, the most vibrant and complex ones were imported, traded for furs, amber, or slaves. A single, intricately patterned glass bead could be worth a significant amount of goods. The amber, the fossilized resin from ancient forests, was another key commodity. It was light, beautiful, and believed to have magical or protective properties. The Vikings controlled much of the amber trade route from the Baltic coast down to the rest of Europe. Wearing it was like wearing shares in a successful company. Now shift your gaze to a successful warrior talking with his friends. His wealth is displayed differently, but according to the same principle. He wears a massive silver arm ring his bicep. It's not a delicate bracelet, it's a thick, heavy band of twisted silver, weighing a pound or more. This isn't just decoration. It's bullion. These arm rings, often called oath rings, were a common way for a chieftain to reward his loyal followers. After a successful raid, the loot would be divided, and a warrior would receive his share in the form of silver. He could then take this to a silversmith to be melted down and formed into an arm ring, a tangible symbol of his success in battle. This system had a brilliant, practical application. Imagine the warrior is traveling and needs to buy a new axe, a boat, or provisions. He can't hand over a credit card. Instead, he uses a practice known as the hex silver economy. He would take his heavy arm ring, place it on a hard surface, and, with a chisel and hammer, literally hack a piece off. This chunk of silver would be weighed on a small, portable set of scales which many traders carried with them, and its value determined by its weight. The arm ring was a wearable, divisible bar of silver. The nicks and cuts on these rings, which we see in archaeological finds, are the transaction records of a bygone era. This practice is a subject of great interest to economic historians and archaeologists. They debate the level of standardization. Was there a commonly understood weight? Like a pre-modern ounce or gram, the evidence points to a system that was both sophisticated and surprisingly informal, relying on scales and negotiation. Some arm rings even have small nicks along their length, which some scholars speculate might be pre-measured cutting points, although this is not universally accepted. So when you look at the Vikings, you must learn to see past the mere aesthetics of their adornments. The jarl's wife with her beads and brooches is a walking treasury. The warrior with his massive arm ring is his own mobile bank. Their jewelry isn't frivolous. It's their liquidity, their investment portfolio, their emergency fund. If their settlement were attacked and they had to flee, they could carry their fortune with them, woven into their clothes and clasped around their arms. In this unstable and violent world, the safest place to keep your money was on your person, turning the human body into the ultimate vault. You take a slow walk through the heart of the settlement, trying to isolate all the sensory information you've gathered. You've seen the sights, but now you focus on the smells. The olfactory landscape of a Viking village is as complex and revealing as its visual one. It's a full-bodied perfume of life, industry, and nature, all intermingled. Close your eyes for a moment and just breathe. The most dominant note, the one that has been present since you arrived, is smoke. Not the acrid, industrial smoke of a modern city, but the rich, woody smoke from dozens of open fires. Every longhouse has a central hearth for cooking and heating, but no chimney. The smoke simply finds its way out through a hole in the roof or gaps in the timber. It clings to everything: the turf roofs, the woolen clothes, the people's hair and skin. It's a constant, inescapable presence, a comforting scent of home for those who live here, but a pungent, eye-watering reminder of the air quality for you. Beneath the smoke, there's the sharp, almost antiseptic smell you identified earlier. Lie. It wafts from the area where the women are making the caustic bleaching soap, but it's also present in a milder form around the longhouses, the lingering scent of bath day. It's a clean smell, but a harsh one, the smell of chemical transformation. It cuts through the other, more organic scents. As you walk closer to the docks, the air changes. The salty, briny smell of the sea gets stronger, mixed with the damp, slightly funky odor of wet wooden ropes. But there's another smell here, a powerful, oily, and slightly rancid one. It's the smell of tar. The Vikings coated the hulls of their long ships with a mixture of pine tar and animal fat to waterproof them. The process of making this tar by slowly burning pine roots in a covered pit produced a thick, black, and incredibly pungent substance. The smell of hot tar is the smell of maritime power, the scent of the very vessels that allowed this culture to explore and expand its world. Wandering away from the water and towards the dwellings, you pick up the smells of domestic life. There's the savory aroma of a stew bubbling over a fire, probably a mix of barley, root vegetables, and whatever meat or fish was available. It's a hearty, nourishing smell, but mixed with it is the slightly sour scent of fermentation. The Vikings brewed their own beer, ale, and mead, and the smell of fermenting grain and honey would have been a common feature of any settlement. There's also the faint, tangy smell of soured milk, as they maiden consumed skyar, a yogurt-like cultured dairy product. But what about personal fragrance? Did they try to smell good in a way we would recognize? The answer is yes. But their perfume counter was the forest and the bog. You notice a woman tucking a small bundle of dried herbs into a pouch at her belt. You get a faint whiff of it as she passes a sweet, almost floral scent. This is likely Meadow's Philopendula omaria, a common plant whose fragrant flowers were used to strew on the floors of longhouses to cover up other, less pleasant smells. It was a natural air freshener. A more personal and intriguing scent is that of bog myrtle America gale. This shrub, which grows in acidic bogs, has a strong, pleasant, herbal aroma. The Vikings used it for many things: as an insect repellent, as a flavoring for their ale, and as a personal deodorant or perfume. A Viking warrior, before a feast or a social gathering, might rub the leaves on his skin and clothes to give himself a fresh, green scent. It was the Viking equivalent of cologne. The specifics of Viking perfumery are a niche but fascinating area of historical research. What other aromatic plants did they use? Did they create infused oils? Chemical analysis of residues in small vials found in graves sometimes offers clues, but often the organic compounds are too degraded to identify. It's a field where scholars debate whether certain herbs were for scent, medicine, or ritual, and often the answer is all of the above. For instance, the use of bog myrtle in ale was both for flavor and likely for its intoxicating, and some say hangover-inducing, properties. As you stand there, cataloging the air, you realize that the scent of this place is a story in itself. It's the smoke of community, the lie of vanity, the tar of exploration, the stew of survival, and the herbs of a people trying to carve out a small pocket of pleasantness in a harsh world. It's not a simple, clean smell, nor is it the wall-to-wall filth of a medieval slum. It's a complex, layered scent, the authentic and unsanitized smell of life in the Viking Age. You find yourself back near the Jarl's longhouse, watching his wife again, just now sitting in the sunlight, engaged in a quiet moment of personal grooming. From a small, decorated leather pouch, she withdraws a set of tools. You see the familiar glint of a comb, this one carved from ivory with a silver spine. But she also pulls out a few other items: a delicate pair of bronze tweezers and a long, slender tool with a tiny scoop at one end and ear spoon. She uses the tweezers to pluck a stray hair from her eyebrow, her movements precise and practiced. Then she takes the ear spoon and carefully cleans her ears. It's a moment of mundane, everyday hygiene. These tools, combs, tweezers, or spoons, and even tiny nail cleaners are found in abundance in Viking graves, buried with both men and women. They were clearly cherished personal items, the essential components of a Viking era toiletry kit. They are often beautifully crafted, made from bronze, silver, or carved bone, and hung together on a metal ring that could be suspended from a brooch or a belt. They were meant to be seen, another small display of status and refinement. But as you watch her, a chilling thought occurs to you. You are in a world with no concept of germs, no understanding of bacteria, no antibiotics. In this context, these beautiful, treasured grooming tools are not just benign implements of vanity, they are potentially lethal weapons. Consider the tweezers. If she nips her skin while plucking an eyebrow, she creates a tiny open wound. The tweezers themselves, having been handled, dropped, and stored in a leather pouch, are teeming with invisible bacteria. Staphylococcus, streptococcus, the common residents of human skin and the environment, are now introduced directly into her bloodstream. In our world, this would likely result in a small, reed bump, easily fought off by a healthy immune system or treated with a dab of antiseptic cream. In her world, it could be a death sentence. A small, localized infection could quickly spiral out of control, with no antibiotics to stop its spread. the bacteria could multiply unchecked, leading to solidifies, a painful, spreading skin infection. This could then lead to sepsis, a systemic infection of the blood, resulting in fever, shock, and, more often than not, a slow and agonizing death, all from one misplaced pluck of an eyebrow. Now think about the ear spoon. This is even more dangerous. The ear canal is a delicate environment. A small, accidental scrape with that metal or bone tool could cause a cut in the thin skin. This could lead to a severe outer ear infection otitis externa. Or, if she pushes too far, she could perforate her eardrum, opening a pathway for bacteria to enter the middle ear. A middle ear infection could, in turn, spread to the mastoid bone behind the ear, and from there, into the brain, causing meningitis or a brain abscess. It's a terrifying chain reaction, all started by a simple, common act of cleaning. The same danger applies to the men. A warrior using a small knife to trim his beard could easily nick himself. A small cut from a razor that was perfectly clean could become a raging infection. Even the beloved comb, if used too vigorously on a scalp already irritated by lye soap, could cause scratches that could become infected. Given their communal washing habits, as described by observers like Ibn Fadl An, where a whole group would use the same bowl of water, the transfer of bacteria would have been incredibly efficient. Historians and paleopathologists who study ancient skeletal remains see the evidence of this constant battle against infection written in the bones. They find signs of osteomyelitis, bone infection, and other infectious diseases that were rampant in the pre-antibiotic era. The debate often revolves around the Vikings' immune systems. Were they, through constant exposure, more robust and resistant to common bacteria than modern humans are to some extent? Yes, their immune systems would have been battle-hardened, but there was a limit. A severe infection, especially from a deep wound or a particularly virulent strain of bacteria, could overwhelm even the strongest Viking. You look at the elegant grooming kit with a new sense of dread. It represents one of the great paradoxes of the Viking Age. They were a people obsessed with cleanliness and grooming, using these tools to achieve a refined and ordered appearance. Yet, the very act of using these tools, in their ignorance of microbiology, exposed them to constant, invisible danger. Their pursuit of beauty was a daily gamble with infection and death. Every pluck, every scrape, every comb through was a small roll of the dice in a game. They didn't even know they were playing. Your understanding of Viking aesthetics has deepened. It's not just about bodies, it's about the total presentation. You start to look more closely at what they are wearing, moving beyond the jewelry and realizing that the fabrics themselves tell a powerful story. The clothes on a person's back are a silent, woven declaration of their place in the world. You see a group of thralls working, dressed in their drab, functional tunics. You touch the fabric of a discarded rag, it's rough, scratchy, and thick. This is VML, the backbone of Viking textiles. It's a coarse, plain woven woolen cloth, incredibly durable and weather-resistant, but not particularly comfortable. Its color is the dull, grayish-brown of undyed sheep's wool. This is the fabric of the poor Indian slave. It's functional, it keeps you warm, but it makes no statement other than one of pure utility. Producing VML was a huge part of the household economy, and it was so standardized that it was even used as a form of currency, with legal values set for bolts of a certain size and quality. Now, look back at the Carl, the freeman farmer. His tunic is also made of wool, but it feels different. It's a finer weave, softer to the touch. It's been dyed a solid, earthy color, a reddish brown that might have come from tree bark or a deep yellow from a local plant. The ability to dye fabric required time, resources, and specialized knowledge. Even a simple, single-colored garment represented a step up in the social hierarchy. It showed a household had enough surplus resources to invest in aesthetics, not just survival. Then, your eyes fall upon the Jarl and his wife. Their clothing is from another world entirely. The jar Eleskog, that vibrant, almost electric blue, is the Viking equivalent of a luxury sports car. This color was produced from the woad plant, and achieving such a deep, lasting shade was an incredibly difficult and expensive process, requiring huge quantities of the plant and a complex fermentation process. It was a color reserved for the absolute elite. His wife's dress has bands of a deep, rich red. This color might have come from the madder root, a plant that was cultivated and traded specifically for its dyeing properties. An even more luxurious red could be produced from K. hermes, a tiny scale insect found on oak trees in the Mediterranean. A garment dyed with K. hermes reed would have been astronomically expensive, a clear sign of connections to the far south. But it's not just the color, it's the fabric and the pattern. Look closely at the cuffs and collar of the jarl's tunic. You see intricate, tablet-woven bands with geometric patterns in multiple colors. Tablet weaving is a complex technique that produces strong, decorative braids and bands. It's a highly skilled, time-consuming craft. These bands were not just decorative trim, they were a way to show off the skill of the women in the household or the ability to hire a master weaver. And then there's the ultimate luxury silk. You see thin, shimmering strips of its own onto the jar. Del Estinic. Silk came from the east, either from the Byzantine Empire or further along the Silk Road. It was so precious that it was rarely used for entire garments. Instead, it was cut into thin strips and used as an apple key, a shimmering accent that caught the light and broadcasted immense wealth and worldliness. To own silk was to own a piece of a distant, almost mythical land. The variety and origin of these textiles is a constant source of discovery and debate for archaeologists. By analyzing microscopic fibers found in graves, they can trace the trade routes of the Viking world. They find wool from specific breeds of sheep, linen from cultivated flax, and exotic imports like silk and even cotton. The question of who made these textiles is also complex. Was all weaving done by women within the household, or their professional, specialized weavers who catered to the elite? The evidence suggests both were true. What you wear also dictates how you move. A thrall in a rough tunic can work in the fields. A freeman in a better quality outfit can manage his farm. But the jarl, in his long, heavy, richly decorated cloak, cannot perform manual labor. His very clothes signal that he is above such things. His wife, in her layered dress and heavy jewelry, moves with a certain stately grace, her finery a beautiful constraint. You realize that a Viking settlement is a living tapestry. The dull, earthy tones of the common folk form the background, while the vibrant blues, reds, and shimmering silks of the elite are the bright threads that create the central image. In this society, you don't just wear your heart on your sleeve, you wear your entire social and economic standing, woven into the very fibers of your clothes. As you stand there, trying to synthesize all these observations, the hygiene, the hairstyles, the body modifications, the clothing, you start to feel like you are the only one who finds this level of grooming surprising. To the people in this settlement, it's just life. But you are not the first outsider to be struck by this. For a moment, you can almost hear another voice, a historical one, narrating his own astonishment alongside yours. Let your mind drift to the middle of the 10th century. Imagine a man named Dalmadibin Fadaland. He is not a warrior or a farmer. He is a sophisticated, educated man, a member of an embassy sent from the powerful Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. His world is one of great libraries, ornate mosques, public bathhouses, and refined courtly manners. Now, he finds himself on the banks of the Volga River, in what is now Russia, encountering a group of Norse traders who call themselves the Rus. These are Vikings, far from their Scandinavian homeland, plying the great river trade routes to the east. Ibn Fadl-an is a meticulous observer, and he keeps a detailed journal, Harisalah, of his travels. This document is one of the most precious written accounts we have of the Vikings, a rare snapshot of them through the eyes of a contemporary from a completely different culture, and what he writes is a fascinating mixture of disgust and grudging admiration. He is, at first, horrified by their hygiene. He describes their morning ritual, the one you've already found so perplexing. A servant brings a large basin of water each morning, and the master of the house begins to wash his face and hands and comb his hair in it. Then, he blows his nose and spits into the same water. When he is done, the basin is passed to the next person, who does exactly the same thing, and so on, until everyone in the house has used the same filthy water. To the devoutly clean Ibn Fadl, for whom Islamic tradition prescribed washing in fresh, running water, this communal basin is an abomination. He calls them the filthiest of God's creatures. But then, his narrative reveals a different side. Despite his shock at their washing methods, he is forced to admit that they do wash, they care. He notes their physical appearance with the eye of a connoisseur, describing them as being tall as date palms, blonde and ruddy. He doesn't see them as small or brutish. He sees magnificent physical specimens. He also makes specific mention of their constant attention to their weapons, keeping their swords and axes sharpened clean. Most telling, however, is his description of their attire and grooming. He notes that the men are adorned with jewelry, wearing gold and silver arm rings. He describes the women's elaborate jewelry, specifically the chest boxes made of silver or gold, which signified their husbands' wealth, a clear reference to the turtle brooches and the portable wealth you've witnessed. He sees their tattoos, describing them as dark green patterns of trees and symbols, covering them from their fingernails to their necks. While extensive tattooing is more associated with the Rus Vikings of the East than those in Scandinavia, it's another powerful piece of evidence for their dedication to body modification. The account of Ibn Fadl is a historical treasure, but it's also a point of contention for scholars. How much of it is objective reporting, and how much is colored by his own cultural biases? Did he exaggerate the filthy aspects to make them seem more other to his audience back in Baghdad? Was he describing a specific group of Rus traders whose customs might have differed from those back in Scandinavia, for example? His account is the primary source for the dramatic ship funeral ritual, but archaeologists have found little direct evidence for a ceremony exactly as he described it. Despite these academic debates, Ibn Fadlan's testimony is invaluable. He confirms the Viking paradox. He sees people who engage in what he considers disgusting habits, yet simultaneously exhibit a powerful, almost obsessive vanity. They are, in his eyes, a bundle of contradictions, filthy yet statuesque, barbaric yet adorned in gold, savage yet meticulously groomed. His writings serve as a powerful counterpoint to the complaints of the English monks. While the English were owning that the Vikings were to clean and were stealing their women, Ibn Fadl, coming from a culture with a far more sophisticated standard of hygiene, found them wanting. His surprise mirrors your own. It's the shock of realizing that clean and groomed are not universal concepts. They are culturally defined. The Vikings had their own elaborate code of beauty and hygiene. It wasn't the English code, and it certainly wasn't the Bedagdi code. It was uniquely and brutally their own. The day begins to fade. The low sun casts long shadows from the longhouses, and a chill begins to creep back into the air. The activity in the settlement slows. People gathering their tools and turning towards their homes for the evening meal. Your journey through the world of the living is nearing its end. But there's one last place to visit to truly understand the depth of this culture's obsession with appearance, the world of the dead. You walk to a quiet area just outside the main settlement. A field dotted with small, man-made hills and stone ship settings. This is a burial ground. For the Vikings, death was not an end, but a transition to another life, and they believed the deceased would need to take their most important possessions with them. What they chose to bury with their dead reveals what they valued most in life. You peer into the cross-section of an excavated grave, a reconstruction of an archaeological find. This one is the grave of a wealthy woman. She is laid out on her back, dressed in her finest clothes. You can see the ghostly outlines of the woolen dress and the two great turtle brooches on her chest. Their bronze now green with a 1,000-year-old patina. Between them lie the melted, fused remains of her glass and amber beads. By her side, you see the dark, rusted shape of a pair of scissors and a spindle whorl, symbols of her domestic power. And, placed carefully near her head, is a comb. Even in death, she would need to keep her hair tidy for the journey ahead. In another grave, that of a warrior, the story is similar, but with different props. He is buried with his sword, its iron blade corroded, but its patterned hilt still visible. His shield boss lies on his chest, the wooden part of the shield having long since rotted away. His spearhead is by his side. But among these instruments of war, you also find the familiar, intimate tools of grooming: a small set of bronze tweezers, a razor, its blade paper thin with rust, and, of course, a comb carved from antler, tucked by his hip. He was sent to Valhalla not just as a warrior, but as a well-groomed warrior. The sheer number of grooming tools found in Viking graves is staggering. Combs are one of the most common of all grave goods, found in the burials of men, women, and even children. This tells us, unequivocally, that these were not just frivolous trinkets. They were seen as essential personal equipment, as vital for the afterlife as a good axe or a warm cloak. The journey to the next world was a long one, and apparently, you were expected to show up looking presentable. This practice forces historians to consider the spiritual significance of grooming. Was it simply about looking good for the gods, or did the act of grooming itself have a ritualistic, protective quality? Perhaps an ordered appearance was believed to help bring order to the chaotic transition of death. Some scholars theorize that the intricate knotwork patterns carved onto the combs were not just decorative, but were a form of magical symbol, an amulet to protect the soul. The debate hinges on how we interpret objects without text. Are they art, tools, or talismans in the Viking mind? They were likely all three at once. The most famous examples of this are the spectacular ship burials, like the one discovered at Osberger in Norway. This was the final resting place of the very highest women, buried in a stunningly preserved and decorated ship, surrounded by an incredible wealth of objects. Among the treasures were sleighs, carts, tapestries, and chests filled with personal items. And yes, within those chests and scattered around the burial chamber were multiple combs, grooming kits, and even the remains of cosmetics. Their journey to the afterlife was to be made in the grandest style imaginable, and that included all the necessary tools for their beauty routines. Looking at these graves, you realize that the brutal beauty standards of the Vikings were not just a feature of their mortal lives. They were a core part of their cosmology. Their aesthetic choices were so deeply ingrained in their identity that they were projected into eternity. The need to be well kept, to present a specific, idealized version of oneself, transcended the boundary between the living and the dead. It was a concern for this world and the next. The filed teeth, the bleached hair, the precious combs, these weren't just about impressing your neighbors in the settlement. They were about impressing your ancestors and your gods. It was an all-encompassing aesthetic, a way of life and a way of death, ensuring that even as a skeleton in the cold earth, you still had the tools to maintain a respectable appearance. The sky is now a deep, bruised purple, and the first stars are beginning to appear. The smoke from the longhouse hearth rises straight into the still, cold air. You stand on a small hill overlooking the settlement, and all the threads of the day begin to weave themselves together in your mind. You've seen the individual elements, but now you see the whole, impossible picture. You finally understand just how brutal and contradictory the Viking ideal of beauty truly was. Let's try to build the perfect Viking man. According to the standards you've witnessed, he must begin with a strong, healthy physique, honed by hard physical labor and training. But that's just the foundation. His skin must be weathered and scarred from battle, but only on the front. Of course, A scar on his back would be an instant disqualification. His face must tell a story of courage and survival. Next, his hair. It must be long, but not just any long hair will do. It must be bleached to a brilliant, almost unnatural shade of blonde using a caustic-like soap that burns his scalp and ruins the hair's natural texture. Then, this damaged hair must be meticulously combed and woven into complex, tight braids, perhaps decorated with beads or metal rings, to be both practical for battle and stylish for the feast hall. His beard must be full and thick, a symbol of his masculinity. It too must be combed, oiled, possibly braided and decorated. To be beardless is to be a boy. His eyes must be sharp and intimidating, which means they should be lined with toxic, lead-based coal, giving him a piercing, almost supernatural gaze, even as it slowly poisons him. And then, the master stroke of brutal commitment, his teeth. He must endure an excruciating procedure to have parallel grooves filed into his front incisors, a permanent mark of his membership in an elite group. These grooves might then be filled with black or red pigment, turning his smile into a terrifying display of conformity and ferocity. He must be adorned with wealth, but not in a gaudy way. A heavy silver arm ring, earned through loyalty and bloodshed, serves as his bank account. His cloak is fastened with a finely crafted brooch. His belt holds a well-honed axe, but also a delicate, decorated comb. He is a walking contradiction. He is both a barbarian and a dandy. His aesthetic is equal parts warrior and runway model. He must look terrifying and handsome at the same time. He is a man who endures ritualized torture for his teeth, but also carefully oils his beard. He uses chemical weapons on his own head for the perfect hair color. He is obsessed with cleanliness in a world of mud and blood. Now, what about the perfect Viking woman? Her ideal is no less demanding. She must be strong and sturdy, capable of running a large household and surviving the hardships of the north. Her beauty is tied to an image of health and fertility. Her hair must be long and lustrous, styled in elaborate, status-signifying knots. Her clothes must be made of the finest fabrics her family can afford, in the richest, most expensive colors, and she must be a walking display of the family's fortune, draped in heavy bronze or silver brooches, and weighed down with strings of imported beads and amber. She is both a manager and a mannequin, a symbol of domestic power and of her husband's success. When you put all these pieces together, you realize that achieving this perfect look was nearly impossible. It required a specific genetic heritage to be tall and ruddy, immense wealth for the jewelry, dyes, and silk, incredible pain tolerance for the scars and dental work, and a lifetime of meticulous, daily effort. It was a standard so high, so specific, and so demanding that almost no one could have ticked all the boxes. This is a truth that resonates through history. Beauty standards are often designed to be unattainable. They are a goal to strive for, a way of creating social hierarchy and a sense of belonging for those who can get closest to the ideal. The Vikings, for all their rugged pragmatism, were no different. Their beauty standards were a complex and punishing game. And as you look down on the flickering lights of the settlement, you see a community of people, all trying, in their own way, to win it. The history of their vanity is not a footnote. It is central to understanding who they were and what they valued. It's a story of the brutal, impossible pursuit of an ideal, written in bleach, braids, and blood. As the last light drains from the sky, a profound sense of perspective settles over you. The strangeness of this Viking world begins to feel less strange. The filed teeth, the lie-bleached hair, the pride in scarring these practices that seemed so alien at first now appear as part of a familiar, timeless human pattern. You came here to witness a brutal and impossible standard of beauty, but you're leaving with the realization that the echo of that brutality and impossibility is all around you, even in your own time. Think about the core motivations you've observed today. The desire to belong to an exclusive group, The need to signal status and wealth, the drive to look younger, stronger, or more intimidating, the willingness to endure pain undressed for a desired aesthetic. Does any of that sound unfamiliar? The Viking warrior filing grooves into his teeth to mark his membership in a warrior guild as he's so different from a modern individual, getting a specific tattoo to show their affiliation with a group, a team, or a cause. Both are permanent modifications, declarations of identity written on the body. The man and woman bleaching their hair with lye, risking chemical burns to achieve the divine blonde look. Are they so far removed from people today who use powerful bleaches, dyes, and chemical treatments to change their hair color, often damaging it in the process? To conform to a trend or an ideal, the technology has changed, but the fundamental desire to alter one's natural appearance to match a cultural preference has not. The Jar-L's wife, draped in expensive imported beads and fabrics to display her family's success. How different is she, really, from someone wearing a designer watch, carrying a luxury handbag, or driving an expensive car? The objects are different, but the language of conspicuous consumption is universal. It's about signaling wealth and status to your peers. The warrior cultivating a fierce appearance with kohl-lined eyes and braided hair to intimidate his enemies. Is this not the same principle behind a modern executive wearing a power suit to a negotiation, or an athlete adopting a certain swagger and look to psych out their opponents? It's all a performance, using appearance to gain a psychological edge. And the most visceral example, the acceptance of pain. The warrior enduring the agony of the filing tool, the sting of the lysope, the lifelong discomfort of a battle scar. We may not engage in those specific practices, but our own era is filled with brutal beauty rituals. Think of cosmetic surgery, with its scalpels, injections, and painful recovery periods. Think of restrictive diets, grueling exercise regimens pushed to the point of injury, or painful hair removal procedures. Humans have always been willing to suffer for what they perceive as beauty. The Viking methods were just more direct, more DIY, their tools forged in iron instead of sterilized in an autoclave. The academic debate on this topic is fascinating. Some cultural historians argue that comparing ancient practices to modern ones is a form of presentism and fairly judging the past by today's standards. They would say that Viking beauty rituals were deeply embedded in their unique religious, social, and economic context and can't be neatly equated with modern vanity. Other scholars, from fields like evolutionary psychology, might argue the opposite, that these are all just different cultural expressions of the same deep-seated human impulses to attract mates, signal fitness, and navigate social hierarchies. As you stand on your hill, looking down at the Viking settlement, you realize that perhaps both are true. The context is unique, but the impulse is universal. The brutal beauty of the Vikings is not a historical oddity. It's a powerful, thousand-year-old reflection of a core part of the human condition, the Shirosin's wrong X, I.N. the vanity. The desire for admiration that drove a Viking to decorate his beard with a silver ring is the same impulse that drives us today. The technology, the styles, and the acceptable levels of risk have changed, but the deep, resonant echo of that human need to shape and be shaped by the eyes of others remains as powerful as ever. The stage is different, the costumes have changed, but the play is exactly the same. The deep purple of the sky begins to soften at the eastern horizon, a pale, milky gray heralding the dawn. A damp chill hangs in the air, carrying the scent of dew on cold earth. The settlement is stirring, but quietly. The sounds are muffled, a low murmur from within a longhouse, the distant bleating of a sheep, the soft crunch of your own feet on the gravelly path as you walk back down towards the harbor. Your journey here is over. It's time to watch them leave. Down by the water, a long ship is being prepared for departure. It rests slow in the water, its sleek, clinker-built hull looking both elegant and menacing. At its prow, a fearsome dragon head rears up, its carved wooden teeth bared in a silent, permanent snarl. The shields of the crew are mounted along the gunwales, a row of painted circles that add a splash of color to the dark wood. The crew moves with a quiet, practiced efficiency. These are the men you have been watching. You see their bleached hair, tightly braided. You see the coal, perhaps smudged from sleep, still faintly lining their eyes. One of them shouts an order, and in a brief flash of a smile, you think you can see the faint, dark lines of filed teeth. They are no longer just a collection of brutal beauty standards, they are a cohesive unit. Their shared aesthetic a uniform of identity and intimidation. They are leaving to trade, or perhaps to raid, looking every bit the part of the Viking ideal. With a series of rhythmic grunts, they hoist the mast. Then comes the sail. It's not the white canvas you might expect. It's a huge, square sail made of heavy wool. Its panels dyed in broad vertical stripes of red and white. We often forget that their sails were not just functional but were also status symbols. A wealthy chieftain could afford a brightly dyed sail, a banner of his power visible for miles across the sea. This woolen sail, likely coated in a greasy mixture of tallow and fish oil to make it water resistant, is a testament to the skill of the women who wove it and the wealth of the man who owns the ship. The dragon head on the prow is another fascinating detail, one that historians still ponder. Was it purely for psychological warfare, designed to strike terror into the hearts of those on the shores they approached, or did it serve a deeper, spiritual purpose? Some scholars argue these figureheads were powerful talismans, meant to ward off the evil spirits and monstrous sea serpents, the Jair Mungandar of their mythology, that lurked in the deep ocean. It's possible that upon returning to friendly shores, they would remove the fearsome head so as not to frighten the friendly spirits. The land VTT, IRR, that protected their home. It was likely both a magical guardian on the open sea and a terrifying calling card abroad. The ship is pushed off from the shore. The oars are deployed, and with long, powerful strokes, the crew pulls it out into the deeper water of the fjord. The great, striped sail is unfurled, and it catches the morning breeze with a satisfying whoomp. The ship begins to pick up speed, gliding silently away from the land. You stand on the shore, the cold water lapping at your feet, and you watch as the long ship gets smaller and smaller. It heads towards the mouth of the fjord, where a thick bank of morning mist is rolling in off the sea. The ship enters the mist, and for a moment, it becomes a silhouette, a ghostly dragon against a wall of white. Then, it's gone. The figures, the faces, the brutal and beautiful details of this world begin to fade with it. The jarl and his finery, the warrior and his scars, the woman with her lye soap, they all recede, pulling back from the sharp focus of reality into the soft, hazy realm of memory. The world of the Vikings slips back into the mist from which it came, leaving only the sound of the lapping waves and the lingering scent of wood smoke on the morning air. And now, the mist swirls around you. It's no longer cold, but soft and warm, like a familiar blanket settling over your shoulders. The sharp, salty air gentles into a clean, soft scent, like fresh linen. The sounds of the Viking harbor, the cry of the gulls, the distant clang of a hammer, the murmur of old Norse, all of it fades into a low, pleasant hum, like the sound of a fan in a quiet room. The details you work so hard to see are beginning to dissolve. The intricate knotwork on a comb unravels into a soft, flowing line. The bright red of a dyed tunic softens into a gentle, rosy glow. The filed grooves on a warrior's teeth smooth over, becoming just a fleeting, half-remembered image at the edge of your mind. You are drifting now, on a calm and quiet sea. There is no destination, no need to observe or understand. The journey is over. This story has been told. Let the rhythm of your own breathing be the oars, pulling you gently further and further away from the shore of wake of snows. Let the weight of your body sink comfortably into your bed, a safe and steady vessel in the calm waters of the night. The images are gone. The thoughts are quiet. There is only this gentle, floating peace, The rest is silence. The rest is sleep. The end of the article. Good night.